Good afternoon and welcome to our presentation today. This is a passionate project for me. I really do enjoy talking about how quickly and easily you can get set up to do virtual learning. One of the sort of benchmarks of what's going on right now in our world is that we need to be able to do things quickly and effectively, but most importantly, remotely and virtually. So, how quickly and easily can we do it? That's what we're going to find out in this quick webinar. So, many of you will have a virtual meeting host, even though you don't recognize it as such. You may have something like Adobe Connect or Zoom or Cisco WebEx or Citrix's GoToMeeting or one of the other go-tos. There's always Google Hangouts or Google Meet, and of course, Microsoft Teams, Skype for Business, and all of the other types of technologies out there. The good news is that virtually any of these can be linked to a class in the Learn on Demand Systems Training Management System, or TMS. We're going to show you how quickly and effectively that can work for you. So the first topic we're going to talk about is how do we get in and create a class from scratch with a custom virtual classroom. This looks like there's a lot of steps here, but one of the steps is just has a little bit of information that you need to provide. The schedule your classroom in your favorite app is the easy part. We've probably done it today, and where you have coordinated a meeting in Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever your favorite product is. Once you've scheduled that meeting, you will have a URL for that meeting. We use that URL when you create the class, and creating a class is very simple inside of the TMS. And it just needs a couple of pieces of information, a name, what kind of labs you want to use, or course as we call it, the days of the event, the virtual type of delivery, and then you put in the URL, and I'll show you where we do that in a little bit. You search for and select any instructor or instructors if you're doing sort of a co-presentation, and you click on Save. So while it does look a little complicated in this slide, the actual creation of the class is relatively easy to use and relatively simple to do. And if you think that's easy, you should see how easy it is to convert an existing physical delivery already in our TMS to a virtual delivery. Now, again, there has been some trepidation about making this happen, making the jump to a virtual delivery. The good news is that if you're already using the Learn on Demand Systems TMS, or if you have just become a TMS customer, this fundamental change from physical to virtual is very, very simple. You simply edit the class, you get you schedule your meeting just like you would any other meeting for the length of time of your class, multiple days reoccurring, all of the other information that you would normally do for a meeting in Teams or Zoom or whatever. Once you have the URL, you copy it. You then go in and edit your class, change the physical delivery to a virtual delivery like you see here, and then you put the URL in. That's it. Those are the very simple steps that are necessary to convert from a physical delivery to a virtual delivery. So if you're in need of doing a virtual delivery, you have the capabilities. Now, these are linking the meeting that you're creating to your class, but we've got one even more integrated step, and that is what we call the Adobe Connect API integration features. And we can't call it Adobe Connect for much longer because very soon we are going to have Zoom integration. And following that, we will have Teams integration. Now, I've already mentioned Zoom and Teams as a method of using a custom meeting host or classroom virtual host as a URL. But with the integration, you don't even have to put in the URL. And all of these features that you see on the left-hand side come automatically. So virtual classroom creation, you want to make a change to a who's going to be the presenter, or you want to change a time or a date, all of those features change automatically. You don't have to make the change in your meeting and then update your class. You make the change to the class, it automatically updates your meeting. It gives you the ability to um, access the recordings of the event, whether it be multiple day recordings or if it's multiple part day recordings or whatever. All of those are accessed post class in the recording section, which again we'll show you a little bit later on when we do the demonstration. And then the sort of the general synopsis here is, if you make a change to the TMS class, it automatically changes the Adobe Connect class or Zoom class in the near future. That API integration is really, really simple and easy. And again, we'll show you how simple and easy in just a little bit. There are a couple of things that you really do want to focus on when you're doing virtual classes. And we're going to talk later in the week during other sessions that we have going on about some of the very important topics for, say, instructors or for operations managers. But we're going to put some very important things that you need to concentrate on when you're working with a virtual classroom, regardless of whether it has labs or any of that kind of stuff. Just the fundamentals of working with a virtual classroom. And the number one bullet point can't be overstressed. Make sure your dates and times are absolutely correct, and make a determination of which time zone all of your content is going to be available. If you want to use UTC or GMT, or if you're going to use the Eastern time zone or Central or Mountain or Pacific, just remember that not everyone's going to understand exactly what those time zones translate to. So when you send out invites and things like that, those time zones are going to need to be translated for the people who are coming in, unless you're going to give them some sort of resource that's going to do that for them automatically. Making sure your dates and times are correct, not only for your meeting host, but also for your class, are going to be important. And I'll show you where we set those as we do this. Make sure that you assign the instructor or instructors the either presenter role or owner role or co-owner role or whatever is needed, so that they can actually launch the event, the classroom, the meeting, if you will, so that they don't have to have you be present in order to be able to get access to the things they need to do. For example, a lot of times students will come into a lobby before they actually enter into a meeting, depending on your meeting provider. If that's the case, somebody has to let them in. If the instructor doesn't have the ability to do that, you will need to, as the scheduler of the event, will need to be in there and making that happen. One effective way of doing this is, if your instructor has the same email address as part of your organization, is to use send as when you're sending out the invite for the event, so that that person is listed as the originator of the event. But that doesn't always work, so always make sure you include them in the schedule or in the invite for the event, as I'll show you, as a presenter or owner or co-owner. It is really important that students can come to the event, the class, if you will, without a lot of baggage. They want to be able to come in and get started right away. You don't want the first hour of class being spent trying to get people into the actual classroom. So when you have the URL and once it's available, they will be able to launch inside of their class page. But it's going to be important that they have all of the necessary software. Another one of the features of the integration is a little software check to make sure that the needed software and ports and things like that are available. Once again, we'll show you in a demonstration. But a link to download is a good starting place. Give your students before class the ability to be able to access the download and have it ready to go. Not that the downloads are very large in most cases for the clients, but it's always a good idea to have those already in place. Instructors will typically want to be in the virtual classroom well before the students are expected to arrive. The reason for that is that they may have to admit them from the lobby or into the class. They may have to help with a little bit of basic troubleshooting or get the student into some sort of technical support team or connection in order to be able to make their connections work. For example, somebody that is having trouble with a microphone or headphone or speakers but can work in the chat of the class can communicate with the instructor to at least convey, all right, I'm able to listen but I can't talk, or something along those lines. Just remember that one of the best tips and tricks I can give you is to consider either the Adobe Connect or coming soon Zoom integrations to allow the schedules and the assignments for the instructors to be able to update automatically. So if a last minute change happens for instructors, you don't have to go through and try to get them set up as a co-owner. It automatically is done for you. Now, with all of that said, let's actually take a look at how all of this works. So I'm going to get rid of my slideshow, and we're going to start off working from the point of view of a operations manager or a scheduler, for lack of a better term for it. The person who's responsible for making sure that this event is coming through correctly and is scheduled at an appropriate time. Now, I've started off on this page as a scheduled class or create class. And what we're doing here is we're creating something that will allow the students to not only come in and do labs, which is what Learn on Demand system is well known for, but also will integrate with any one of the uh, meeting host providers that are out there. In this particular case, I'm going to use an example of creating something from scratch for Teams. Now, you can do this either way, but it's a little bit easier if you create the schedule appointment or the scheduled meeting, or as I like to refer to it, the scheduled class first, and then work in the TMS in order to do this. So I'm just using my Outlook scheduling capability, which has integration with Teams. I also have integration with WebEx, and if you have Adobe Connect or some of the other tools, those will also have integrations with Outlook. So I'm just scheduling a meeting inside of my Outlook here. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a name, just making sure we've got it. There we go. So this is a Teams virtual classroom creation example. And then all I need to do is click here to add Teams meeting. And you'll notice that right down here, I have a link, and when I mouse over it, I see the actual HTTPS. If I right click on that and do a copy, now one other thing that I'm going to do is, even though I'm the person who's sending this out, I am going to include myself so that I get it on my schedule so that I'll have a copy of this link later if I need it. So I go ahead and I send this off. Once that's gone, I'm not going to save this because I don't need it. I can set up my class by selecting the course that I'm going to use, and it really doesn't matter which ones I use. But in this particular case, I'm going to just put a sample in here. I'm going to change the name once again. And I'm also setting my root time zone. This is like my base camp. I am going to be giving out all of my information based on the time zone that is listed here. And the time zone I'm using is the central time zone, the one that I am currently operating out of. I set up my session times. Now, when I set up my meeting, I would have said that it would have been for today's date from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., something along those lines. So then I match this with today's date and set it for 1 p.m. to today's date, and we'll just say 5 p.m. and click on OK. That's that. My delivery, I'm going to come back to that in 1 second. First, I'm going to set my instructor. And when I set my instructor, I'm going to make sure that I am putting somebody in who I know happens to be an instructor in the team. And I click on OK. And now when I do my delivery, by default, it defaulted to physical. Now that's perfectly fine. I can change that, but notice that I have also the ability to do a hybrid scenario. So if you do, maybe you're doing some very small classes of 1 or 2 people in a large classroom where they're going to be, and then you have some other people who are working remotely, you could do a hybrid scenario where there's physical and virtual. But in this case, we're just going to do all virtual and put in custom classroom, custom virtual classroom. And then all I have to do is put that URL that I obtained from my meeting, oops, which is this one, and then click on save. Now, when I do this, and it's going to give me some conflicts because I have some other meetings that are set up for today, but once I do this and I go to my class, you will notice that I have an Enter Classroom button for my class. That Enter Classroom button becomes available immediately, even if the meeting is scheduled for some time in the future. All right. So that is the creation of an existing class. Now we can show you examples of using Teams and getting the link from there, or perhaps you are using Cisco WebEx, and you can see here that this is where you get it from. I have set up 2 examples inside here of Cisco WebEx and Microsoft Teams, and I'm going to show you what these look like from the perspective of the instructor and the student on the day of class. So let me bring up my instructor. Here's my instructor. My instructor is in the Cisco WebEx demonstration class, and my instructor is going to enter the classroom. Now, when he enters the classroom, this is another one of those tips and tricks for you. When you do this, it's going to open it up in a web page first, and then it will attempt to open up the actual WebEx meetings notification that you see here. It's always a good sign, especially if you're an instructor, to make sure that you are closing down excess windows. So when you have connected and started your meeting, you can get rid of this screen and then switch over to your presentation screen. Remember, as an instructor or as an operations scheduler, it's always important to make sure you have as many windows open as you need, but that you are not presenting any excess windows because it can confuse the students as to where they're supposed to be. So now I've got my Cisco WebEx meeting over here. Now I'm going to impersonate a student, and I have a separate web browser that I'm using for that. By the way, web browser is pretty agnostic here. We don't care about which web browser you're using to access the class page, the clients for the various meeting hosts, or your labs, which are another part of the environment. So the student here would click on Enter Classroom. Now, because I'm already signed in to WebEx as myself, I'm actually going to log in from a separate machine, and I'm not going to link from here. So let me just switch back to my WebEx here. And you'll notice here that it says waiting for others to join. And now my student account has clicked on it. And in just a second, they should appear in my list. All of our virtual meeting hosts are experiencing some heavy connectivity related slowdowns, but eventually it does connect. And once the user connects, you can see that when I go to my participant, I have myself and I have my student. And in the very background, you may actually hear an echo going on because I'm actually presenting. So I'll undo that. And now my student and myself are able to go on and be able to do the things that we need to do. I can share my screen with slides and demonstrations. We can speak to each other through microphone and speakers or headsets. And of course, we have things where we can do polls and quizzes and all sorts of other tools that WebEx and other providers have. When it comes to, and I'll go ahead and exit out of this, it is important to note that when I end my meeting here, this will also end it on behalf of the student. So the student's session will also close down. So let's take a look at an example of back to our instructor here, what it looks like when they launch a Teams classroom. Again, all of this is done from a simple URL linking perspective. I click on Enter Classroom. Once again, a sort of a filler web page comes up, or interstitial web page, and then I will get my session to come up and be using this just like I would have used Citrix WebEx or Zoom or whatever. I have the capability, I can do my presentations, I can share my screens, and again, when I'm all done, I can hang up, and once I leave, my student. All right, and once again, I have that extra window or extra tab that I will want to shut down. All right, so just so we're clear, I could go on and show you Zoom and GoToMeeting and all those types of tools that are out there, simply using that common URL or virtual URL. But let's go back to that manager for just a second. And in my manager account, I also have an Adobe Connect classroom set up. Now, in this particular case, we're going to be using an integration and not the linking that we have done in the past. So when I look at this, you will see that the interactivity is pretty much the same, my session time, my instructor, but my delivery has a slightly different window, which is the virtual delivery type, the virtual meeting host, and the template that is needed. Now, this is part of that integration I was talking about. And now, if I were to actually go in and change my scheduled date or time to a different date or time, not only would it change the class inside of the TMS, it would also change the date and time of the virtual classroom automatically. If I change the instructor, it'll change the instructor and change the instructor to the new instructor with the correct permissions and rights for launching. So since we've seen the other ones, let's take a look at what that looks like for the instructor and student. And this one I can do on the same machine. So here in my Adobe Connect classroom, and again, I'm on as instructor, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, you will see that I do have a couple of things that are a little bit different, like the software check. Now, this software check does a confirmation that in this particular case, Adobe Connect uses Flash, and it's making sure that Flash is present and that the ports needed for Flash are available, and it gives me a little OK symbol. It may ask you to install certain software and test it in order to proceed to be able to connect to the class. But here I can click on Enter Classroom. And again, if I switch to my student at the same time and go to the Adobe Connect Classroom, once again, you see that I have this and I have Enter Classroom. And that person is launching as well. So now I have two different people all attempting to access. And again, we have these intermediate pages. Just want to make sure that you're aware that the intermediate pages are common and you are going to probably experience them. Once you have actually done your Adobe Connect and the application itself is running, you'll probably want to get rid of those excess windows. So I'll get rid of that one. And then that's the instructor because it has share screen. Now, as a student, student's logging in and the student is set. Now, I'm not going to do an inception where I have share my screen and sharing my screen and sharing my screen, but I just wanted to show you that the connection is going and running and capable of being delivered to the instructor, or from the instructor to the student. Another great functionality, and I mentioned this earlier, is that you can also record your meetings and have your meeting recordings be available to the end users. Now, you can record meetings in the other custom meeting URLs. However, you have to record them on your machine and then distribute them manually yourself, as opposed to having them automatically done. But if you click on record meeting and start a recording, it will then keep that recording with the session so that the user can review at any time. So let's show you what that looks like real quick. If I switch back to my student here, I have the student already enrolled in a class where we had finished. And if I go in and search for the student's prior classes, you'll see here I have a webcast sample class for recordings. And that information is, oops, there it is. You can see here that I have my recordings. And if I had, oops, I accidentally chose the wrong one. But if I did have the recordings available, they would be listed here. And we can have a separate recording for each day. We could start it at 1 and run it until 4, and then have that one there, have another one available from 6 p.m. until 9 p.m., and have that one available, each one being available. And let's go back to our slide deck real quick. And from the current slide. So let's take a look at some resources that are available to you before we wrap up this session. First of all, I want you to think about some next steps for you and for your team. Get yourself a trial or a full license of a virtual classroom host, Teams, whatever. Doesn't matter what you're using. It doesn't matter if it's trial or licensed. Just generate those URLs and then set up a class. Now, if you don't have permission to set up a class, or if you don't have access to our TMS, contact our sales team and they will help you out. However, setting up a trial class is always a good way of testing out to see whether or not the connectivity works for you. Then test that connectivity out and see how it works. If you already have sessions in our schedule and you are trying to use them through the TMS and want to convert from a physical to a virtual, test that out. It's really not complicated by putting in those extra URLs or just changing it to virtual and putting in the URL. Consider the integration with Adobe Connect, with Zoom coming very soon, and Teams further down the road. And the last thing I want you to think about is what other things you might need as far as resources go. If you don't know which virtual meeting host you want, try out a couple of them. You will get a list of these available to you after the class. And then finally, I want to take the time of thanking you for being here, but I also want to thank the team who's behind all of this functionality. They have put together an excellent resource available on our docs.learnondemand systems site. And if you haven't been there, I strongly encourage you to go, because they have some great things in there. This particular document will take you through how to get the URL and put the URL in as a custom host. And I also strongly encourage you to check out any of the upcoming sessions that are that you may not have seen out there. There's some really good ones for instructors coming up tomorrow, as well as first-time schedulers, or even if you are a not a first-time scheduler, you've done a lot of scheduling, you may want to take a look and see what you can do inside of the getting started with or doing your first virtual class from beginning to end. We also have lots and lots of information coming up about LOD and builders, and we are running a session in the morning and a session in the afternoon, a repeat session in the afternoon for all of this week. So with that being said, I do want to thank you for your time and patience, and I hope that you have gotten a lot out of this.